All right, so welcome everyone again to AI's Ethical Quandaries towards Responsible Integration in Russian Language and Culture Pedagogy. We will go ahead and get started with our first speaker, Molly Blasing, an associate professor at the University of Kentucky, and she was not able to join us today because of a family obligation, so she has sent over a recording of her presentation, which I will share now. All right, can everyone see my screen? All right, and let's hope that the audio works.
Good afternoon. I'm Molly Blasing. I'm an associate professor of Russian studies at the University of Kentucky. And together with Kit Pribble, and Irina Meier and some other folks that are undoubtedly in this session, we're working with a group called CSAILS, the Consortium for the Study of AI and Language in Slavic. I regret that I can't be there live with you today. I have a family obligation, but I wanted to record this video to share a few thoughts about things that I'm thinking about in terms of resources for our field in tackling some of the AI ethics issues that face us today. I'm going to share a few slides. It's very interesting. Here we are. Okay. So when we think about the challenges, ethical challenges facing world language educators or Slavic language or Russian language educators, I think it's really important at this stage in AI development to think much more broadly about ethical challenges facing not just educational fields, but the entire range of industry and other fields of study and other fields of work, because some of the challenges that people are thinking deeply about in other fields are applicable in so many ways to the things that we are grappling with. And so I think it's important as much as possible, particularly in these early stages, in these early years of this AI revolution, to move out of our silos and think broadly about what is possible. So I want to suggest a few ways that cross-disciplinary tools for AI decision-making in our classrooms and in our profession can be informed by work that other folks are doing across the professions. So when we think about world languages and AI ethical frameworks and the challenges that we're facing, these are things that are challenging to folks in lots of other fields. So broadly, we should be connecting with educational ethics writ large. There are folks from K-12 to higher ed. We're thinking about the challenges for how to be ethical stewards of the education profession, of the work of education, to do the best we can for our students. There are folks doing deep work on the importance of maintaining human connections for progress in society, and also ethicists working on human-robot ethical concerns. So as we interact more and more with AIs or even more sophisticated robot technology, what kind of responsibilities do we as humans have in conversation with robots? Emerging also from educational ethics, something I think a lot about is how to preserve the human, the essential things that human educators bring to this process. So centering the human, but also thinking about human-robot connections and interactions and the sociology of those ethical challenges. We think a lot in language teaching and learning as we experiment with AI about accuracy, about authenticity of the experience, about cultural authenticity within these large language models and image generators. These are, questions of accuracy and authenticity are facing professionals across the workforce, across AI research. So we are not alone in these challenges. That's my big takeaway today, that there are folks working on these things from lots of different perspectives. We are talking a lot these days about how to balance AI literacy, right? Skepticism, kind of discernment about the information and the skills that AI provides, and how to have students understand really deeply what's happening when they're interacting with an LLM. But we're also being asked to prepare students for a workforce, for a working world, for a future professional landscape that will expect them to use AI technology. So this is something that other fields are also grappling with, right? How to balance both skepticism and embracing these technologies. Certainly, one of the ethical challenges that all professions are facing is how to deal with data security, privacy, as our students, as our learners are putting more and more personal information into large language models. What are the consequences? What are the frameworks that are needed to maintain security and privacy with this very sensitive, often sensitive data? Fields from the arts to computer science, business. Anyone who deals with intellectual property is worried about AI training data, how the large language models have sort of been given free pass to scrape all of the internet and everything that's been written, sometimes by us. So we're not alone here. And as we think about intellectual property, copyright laws, if we want to make materials, or we want to make particular customized GPTs for our learners, right? What kind of issues are there in terms of training data and intellectual property, copyright issues? These are things, once again, that we're not alone. There's so many resources out there and so many people thinking about the same questions. One of the things that a number of people in our field are working on is how to harness AI for more efficient assessment of student performance and proficiency levels and that sort of thing. And so folks who are working on bias and discrimination, ethical challenges in the AI universe, those voices will bring a lot to the questions that we ask as we develop very specific assessment tools using generative AI. Certainly language educators, whether we teach Russian or other languages, need to think about the uneven language resources across the internet. So things that can happen in English or in Spanish or even in Russian, right, may not be available to people who are working on less commonly taught or even lower resourced languages like African languages or certain languages that don't have the same resources as English, for example, on the internet. What are the implications of that? And another thing that comes up a lot, particularly from some of my students, are the environmental challenges of the data centers and the kind of compute that's necessary to run these. So we want to be mindful of environmental impacts and also really work to keep corporations accountable to the kind of progress that they're promising in terms of efficiency, right, environmental sustainability of AI technology for the future. So I want to share with you a few voices that I'm listening to, that I'm reading, books that I'm reading, scholars that I'm following. Let's advance. Okay. Once again. It's very strange. Okay, I'm back. I'm going to try to show you the slides that I want to speak on. Great. Okay, so here's some folks who are in some cases within the education space and working in other fields. Some of them are linguists, some of them are computer scientists. These are folks who, when you explore the work that they've done through publications or podcasts or lecture videos available on YouTube, they're offering things that I think are really helpful for the kind of work that we're doing. So maybe my top recommendation is Dr. Emily Bender from the University of Washington, who is one of the co-authors together with Timnit Gebru, who's also on this slide, of the Stochastic Parrots paper. If you are not familiar with the Stochastic Parrots paper, this is seminal reading for thinking about large language models, AI ethics, and language in particular, how language is processed through large language models. So Emily Bender has lecture videos all over the internet. She's a really, really fantastic scholar. John Warner also was featured in a Harvey Mudd University lecture series in 2024, together with a different presentation by Emily Bender in the same series. So those are two really great places to start. And Warner has a book, More Than Words, How to Think About Writing in the Age of AI. Our colleagues working in composition, rhetoric, writing instruction are absolutely allies to the foreign language professions. We are all kind of thinking about similar challenges. Timner Gibru worked for, she's a Stanford trained computer scientist who worked for Google. But after the stochastic parrots paper came out, she was summarily fired. She's been looking at AI ethical issues from within computer science, but she speaks on these issues in a way that's really, really accessible. And I think there's a lot of food for thought in the kind of work that she's doing at her organization, DARE, which is the Distributed AI Research organization. All right. Oh, and try one more time. There we go. Okay, a few more voices that I've been reading and listening to. So you're probably familiar with Khan Academy and the way that Khan Academy is online. Wow, you can go on Khan Academy and learn all the math that your kids need to know. So Khan Academy, right, has been trying to democratize educational opportunities through internet resources and educational modules in all subject areas for quite some time. And they've kind of moved into a new stage with Conmigo, the AI tutor. The idea of Selkhan's idea for the future of artificial intelligence is a personalized tutor for every individual around the planet that can work in their language, that can meet their particular educational needs, to personalize education and support the work that's happening in classrooms by teachers. So I think it's really important to understand what his project is, to watch his TED Talk, to watch his lectures, read his materials, to see what's happening there, because this is a very advanced learning platform that is light years ahead of the kind of work that I think most of us are doing in the university context. And so I think we should look to commercial and nonprofit kind of groups that are doing this. Another voice that I was listening to is that's Rebecca Boltzmann, who again is coming from the kind of commercial side, but is working with K-12 educators, higher education folks on bringing, right, sort of smart integration of AI tools into the curriculum. And I think the balance that she finds in her work between our responsibility as educators to our students and maintaining human connections and making decisions that forefront the human interaction, and then thinking about responsible outsourcing of some of the work of educators to AI. I find her work and her voice on this quite compelling. Another really fantastic scholar of AI and bias is Joy Buolamwini. She's at MIT. Her book is Unmasking AI, the mission to protect what is human in a world of machines. So you can see some common threads here: humans, machines, responsible decision-making in educational contexts. So that is what I have for you today. I look forward to catching up with Kit and others later to hear about the rest of the conversation. Thanks so much for having me today.
All right, so I will stop the share. So great. I think that Molly has really given us the framework for our discussion today, gone over some of the big picture issues that we are facing in our field and that are currently facing many other fields, as we're thinking about, when and how to integrate AI. So now we will move to our next presenter, Anna Ivanov. Anna is a PhD candidate in the Department of Slavic Languages and Literatures at Harvard University, and she is currently writing a dissertation titled Networked Russian Poetry from the 1820s to the 2020s. Anna.
Can you hear me okay? I'm having a few microphone issues. Okay, amazing. Um, okay, I'm really happy to be going after Molly's great video because I think she really pointed to some fantastic reasons for collaboration. And I find collaboration to be one of the most promising sort of directions both for the implementation of AI and coming from the implementation of AI. But I think that there are a lot of ethical considerations, and so that's what I'll be talking about today. This piece, which I think a lot of you have probably seen from the PMLA last year, the Desma writes near the end that the concept of a more collaborative approach to design and to research, attuned to place-based considerations, aligned with human interdependence, and reconciled with ecological concerns and social justice, can serve as inspiration toward not only a more just and equitable implementation of AI, but more to my point, an inclusive approach to scholarly research about AI, in particular by the MLA and its membership. And so I'm kind of thinking about a secondary step of this that I think he really rightly points to, especially where existing ethical issues and inequalities and inequities about language representation and understudied languages and underrepresented languages are concerned, that collaboration is a step to make that more ethical. And so I'm asking, how can that collaboration be done ethically? So in my view, collaboration is necessary for critical ethical AI implementation, but I think it comes with ethical quandaries. When we collaborate with AI and when an AI enables collaboration among us, what are we gaining and what might we be giving up? I think that as Ledesma points to have this ethical engagement, we need collaboration. And I think Molly's presentation sort of even broadens that beyond sort of collaborating with people in our own field. Looking to the work that's being done elsewhere can help us really achieve those collaborative ethical implementations. But there are still ethical concerns around access, understanding, and agency. And so I think while we think about guidelines and about things that we want our field to keep in mind when we use AI, I think we also need to think about how these collaborations can be ethical. So a sort of overview of a few places where I really feel collaboration has been really successful in enabling AI use. We've seen, I mean, in C-sales and throughout our field, instructors working together to share best practices for AI use. I think it's among the areas of our field where people are really trying to think through together how we can make this work and learning from each other's tools and being really careful about sort of sharing the practices they're doing, keeping things as open access as possible. So that's really promising. There's also the sense that, as a graduate student, as somebody teaching language, that these tools like AI-assisted translation platforms, chatbots for conversations, automatic transcription, a lot of these things are sort of tools that previously it felt that perhaps only latter faculty at universities with a lot of funding could have access to the newest tools. And a lot of these tools are things that let other people join the conversation. There's also cross institutional collaborations, making AI tools available across departments. I think Molly's presentation reminded us how much more of that can be done. I know at my own university, I went to speak to folks in the Romance Languages department in their pedagogy session, and it was really interesting how they'd sort of had some of the same conversations from different angles, and it was the first time that we'd come together. And so I think we've done a really exciting work coming together from different institutions within Slavic, but there are a lot of different departments within institutions that I think can be maybe more collaborative. And so some ethical concerns here are if we're creating an uneven playing field where only those with collaborative networks can responsibly use AI. If I'm saying that in order to responsibly use AI, we need collaboration, then we need to make sure that these collaborative networks are truly those that sort of anyone can join. There are some issues of access already about where your university is, about the time that you have to sort of join these collaborations. And so I think thinking about how we can let everyone in and make this as accessible as possible is really important. And then, so that was about how collaboration has enabled AI. I think we also have these new forms of collaboration where students from different universities interact, where students work and collaborate with AI in some cases, and where instructors collaborate together. I feel like I've already met so many interesting people and learned so much about pedagogy beyond AI and including AI from this work. And so I think that's a really exciting way that it's pointing towards future collaboration. The ethical concern there is that if we might be encouraging the use of tools that instructors and students don't fully understand, and I think this is something that I really have been thinking about, is that I think it's really exciting that if I'm in a collaboration with someone and I come to the table with an understanding of an algorithm I've designed, how can I make it so that they don't have to sort of reinvent that wheel and that I'm making that, computationally enhanced tool accessible without letting them sort of use a tool without understanding the algorithm behind it, because I think that's when we can sort of really reproduce algorithmic bias. And you don't want the outcome of these really excited collaborations to be that people are using tools without gaining access to the knowledge about how they're designed. And then I'm also curious about how AI mediated collaboration is different from other forms of collaboration. If, we our students are collaborating with AI tools, if that's somehow different, if we're collaborating via AI tools, how that's different. So we framed it around what's gained and lost. I think, as I sort of pointed to in the slide before, collaboration allows people without access to or knowledge of AI tools to incorporate them. But could this mean that we're not engaging critically with the tools? Because there is a lot of background information involved with these. And I really want to think about how to, within these collaborations, not ask people to come um, and sort of just learn from those already implementing it, but sort of have access to knowledge without it being too high of a barrier for access. AI tools can also allow for collaborations that might not otherwise happen, but what differs in these collaborations? I think this is especially true in cross-linguistic interactions. I think we really need to think about the ways that language difference and language barriers can be overcome, but also the ways that existing inequities in what is available online and in which tools have been developed for which languages can be reproduced by these collaborations. I think there are a lot of gains. So there's broader access to educational resources, innovative pedagogical methods, communal understanding and connection, and distributed expertise. I think in general, it's great and in a lot of places in our field already, you'll work on a collaboration where somebody might know more about sort of maybe embodied practices of teaching, and that really helps the collaboration when we're doing something in person. And in the same way, I think it can be really promising if someone comes with a lot of knowledge about AI and critical AI usage, but at the same time, you don't want that distributed expertise to lead to uninformed usage where people are sort of just learning from someone else how to fully implement something without understanding the design and possible biases. There's also a sense of possible unequal burdens of technological adaptation or ethical concerns. So, of the technological adaptation, sort of who are we asking to come to the table and to learn these things in order to participate in these collaborations? Are we asking people who are already really burdened to master a sort of wide range of computational and technological knowledge in order to just come to the table? And also about those ethical concerns, I think so often it is those speakers of the minoritized languages, which are already minoritized, who have to be raising those concerns, or the people who are affected by algorithmic biases, who then within the collaboration become the voice of reminding us of that bias. And so in those collaborations, I think we want to make sure that we sort of are accessible to all people without asking them to speak to those concerns, and that it's truly accessible to everyone, even if you are sort of uncomfortable or unfamiliar with AI tools, without asking people to sort of engage without any understanding. I have no final solutions, but I think it's something that I'm thinking about in terms of our guidelines that I think within critical AI literacy, I think collaboration is one of the key tenets, and that I wouldn't want any guidelines that don't sort of foreground collaboration and the possibilities it offers, but it has to be a critical collaboration. And I think that as we think about our guidelines, I also want to think about what a collaborative critical AI literacy can look like and a critical collaboration, and how our recommendations for ethical AI implementation can not only utilize collaboration, but utilize ethical collaboration. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Anna, for sharing those thoughts. So we will move now to our next presenter, Irina Meier. Irina is a senior lecturer of Russian and director of the Russian program at the University of New Mexico. Her work spans terrorism and violence studies, post-colonial memory, and the integration of AI in education. She is also the creator of Davai, a custom ChatGPT bot for beginner and intermediate learners of Russian, which features regionally diverse virtual personalities to support both cultural and linguistic immersion. Irina.
Thank you, Kit. Okay, so I will talk about the dual role of AI in fostering inclusivity on the one hand, but also perpetuating systemic inequities in Russian language education on the other hand. So AI has just tremendous potential, right, to do both, to foster greater inclusivity, but also, perpetuate inequities if we are not vigilant enough in what we're doing with AI, right? So let's talk about both potentials and risks, and maybe discuss a few ways to move forward, maybe possible solutions. So first, let's talk about positive things, positive sides. So as a tool for inclusivity, AI can help connect students with marginalized Russian-speaking communities, right? And also assist instructors in creating more inclusive content. As we know, Russia is very multicultural, multilingual, right? And tools like tools like AI can help us reflect this diversity that is now not often reflected in the standard course materials, Russian language materials. So, for instance, Kit already mentioned my bot, but this is the way how I used AI for inclusivity. So when I was developing this bot, one of my primary goals was to introduce students to the underrepresented communities and cultures and dialects of Russian. So Davai dialogues reflect code switching and culturally specific communication practices that are usually absent from our standard materials. So, and that allows students to see this linguistic diversity, to see the dialects as an integral part of the real world Russian use and not something marginal. Another way how this bot is also about inclusivity for me is that students who are hesitant to speak up in class, who are scared of talking, to real Russians, right, like right away. Maybe they're shy, maybe they're anxious, maybe they also belong to marginalized communities, right? So this bot provides them with this safe environment. It's a really powerful confidence builder for them. So they practice with the bot before they can engage with the a real speaker. So but again, it doesn't have to be a custom bot, right? Like if you are into diving into something deeper, right? Like creating your own custom bot, you could, but you don't have to. You can still use AI tools to generate dialogues, short stories, assignments that would introduce students to all those cultures and dialects, to all these underrepresented regions, right? Without actually creating something customized. And also by using AI tools outside of textbooks, instructors can lower the costs of educational materials for students, right? I think that was already brought up. But so this way we create accessible, inclusive practice opportunities without asking students to buy expensive textbooks, expensive software, buy more stuff that they already have to buy for our language classes. So in this way, AI can directly support both greater content inclusivity and greater classroom inclusivity. AI also enhances accessibility. So in regards to accessibility, I've heard AI tools being compared to GPS technologies that, once upon a time we used paper maps to drive around, right? And now we use GPS. So GPS actually made driving more accessible to many more people, right? And did we lose some traditional skills by moving from paper maps to GPS? Probably we did, right? But we expanded the access, and that probably has been worth it. So similarly, AI helps students with reading, writing, listening challenges participate more fully. So, for example, AI tools can read a Russian text aloud with adjustable speed, pitch, voice type. Students can speak Russian aloud, and AI can convert their speech into text. AI can summarize difficult passages of Russian text to help them with comprehension. AI can explain concepts visually, right? Because some students are more visual learners, so we can use charts or mind maps to help them grasp the concepts better. It can scaffold grammar explanations at different levels of complexity. So AI can adapt to the proficiency level. It can also diagnose the type of errors that student made, right? Like immediate feedback to the student, what type of error it is, what else you need to practice. So these features help neurodivergent students with dyslexia, second language learners, students with disabilities, engage with Russian content in the ways that were not possible before. And now let's talk about the risks, right? Because with the potentials, of course, we have the risks as well. So AI systems can inadvertently reinforce stereotypes and biases present in the training data. And in our field, in the Slavic studies specifically, this can mean that AI outputs might overemphasize certain images of Russia, right? Like urban, white, Slavic, traditional, while also ignoring, ethnic countries' ethnic, linguistic, cultural diversity. For example, so when I asked ChatGPT to generate images of a family that lives in Russia using an English prompt, it produced this image, right? So kind of gloomy background, gray building, stereotypical clothing, right? The platok, ushanka. Then I tried using a prompt in Russian, and it gave me the complete opposite, right? But it gave me this traditional, colorful, folkloric portrayal of a Russian family. But again, in both cases, we have Slavic-looking people, right? There's no trace of any diversity. So when I asked ChatGPT to depict a typical family from Kazan, right? So when I use Russian prompt, I said, нарисуй семью из Казани. The model defaulted to portraying women in headscarves every time. So despite acknowledging, because then we had a conversation, right, where the AI acknowledged that only about 10 to 15% of women in Kazan regularly wear headscarves. So then I challenged the AI and I asked it, so why do you keep insisting on women wearing scarves in your images? And it suggested redrawing a more representative depiction, right? And then it drew a younger girl in a modern outfit, right, with the headphones and stuff like that. So in other words, even when AI knows the data, because it did give me a percentage of women wearing scarves and not wearing scarves, right, in Kazan, it can't easily escape cultural defaults and stereotypes. So, and another interesting observation is that every time you ask it to draw a family, it would always draw a man, a woman, probably in their 30s, 40s, and two smaller children, right? A boy and a girl. So in most cases, that's what it's going to draw. And I intentionally did not use I did not elaborate my prompts, right? Because I wanted to test its default settings. What will it do if I'm going to give it the bare minimum of the information? So the issue of systemic bias is very pronounced with the so-called resource-scarce languages and dialects. And research shows that when AI developers lack this deep cultural and linguistic knowledge and simply scrape limited internet data, the results would be that the models misrepresent marginalized languages. So, for example, recently the Chechen language was added to Google, right? So it is one of those minority languages now, but the coverage remains very, very limited, often very unreliable. So one of the personalities in Davai is Sieda, a young Chechen woman. So I trained Sieda on cultural information, of course, and on the Chechen-influenced dialect of Russian, but I didn't train it on the Chechen language specifically, right? So when learners ask Sieda to say something in Chechen, it relies on the existing databases. So, and the results are very, very inaccurate. So the other day, it was not even able to say, my name is Sieda correctly in Chechen, right? So again, that's the instructor's role, right? To still explain the gaps. A similar issue happened with Sasha, which is a Yakut virtual personality from Davai. Without any instructions from me, Sasha went completely rogue, and she started using this weird interjection te in her speech, like overusing it a lot. So this was completely unexpected because it's not like this term, this word is not in any of her background files, right? And I couldn't find any linguistic evidence that this is used at all. So then I consulted a native speaker of Yakut, and she confirmed that actually Yakut people don't say te, they say che. So then I had to, of course, retrain it, right? But these examples highlight how AI models, even though carefully designed, fine-tuned, right, they can still generate inaccurate information. They can still fabricate linguistic behaviors, right? Especially for, like I said, resource-scarce languages and dialects. So without collaboration with native speakers, with representatives of those cultures, these errors can perpetuate linguistic erasure rather than promoting better understanding of those cultures. Then bias, of course, also creeps into language tasks, right? And that is very also easy to check. If you experiment with AI tools, ask it to translate something from English into Russian, where English would have something gender neutral, right? In Russian, it would have to make a choice, right? Because in the Russian language, you cannot be as ambiguous as you can be in English sometimes. So when I asked ChatGPT to translate this sentence on the phone, the director said something to the secretary who was off for the day. The AI gave me по телефону директор сказал что-то секретарю, которая в этот день не работала. So the director became male and the secretary became female, even though the original English was gender neutral. So I specifically used the advanced reasoning model of ChatGPT. So you can switch the model that you're using. So the advanced reasoning model is O3. So it will not only give you an answer, but explain its thought process, and that's what I was looking for. So the AI admitted that that this choice was due to the grammatical convenience and also because of the stereotype, right? It actually said that, just muscle memory, this pairing is so frequent that I just felt it was more natural to use it this way. And it is problematic, right? It is problematic. So AI suggested restructuring the sentence. to maintain ambiguity, but we really cannot. I mean, the Russian language does not allow us to keep those gender neutral forms. But I have to say that AI suggested the new feminitive, I don't know, feminitives, right? Like direktorka, right? Which, it pulls from the newer databases as well, right? But it did not suggest, I thought, a more obvious option of director, Director сказала, right? That would be what I would choose as a native speaker, but it never, suggested that. So without intentional correction, Russian studies, especially regional and post-colonial dimensions, risk being flattened or ignored by AI systems. So, for example, when I asked ChatGPT to tell me what holidays are celebrated in Russia, какие праздники празднуют в России, it focused almost entirely on state holidays, Russian Orthodox holidays. So it listed national celebrations, Orthodox Christian rituals, folk holidays, and even some newer informal holidays like Mother's Day. Mother's Day is a quite new holiday for Russian culture, right? It's historically we've been celebrating International Women's Day, and Mother's Day only recently appeared as a holiday. It mentioned even that, but no mention of Ramadan, any holidays like celebrated in the Sahara regions, any Jewish traditions, none of that. No diversity there. In its brief summary, ChatGPT concluded that Russia has a rich holiday culture, blending state holidays, Christian Orthodox rituals, old folk traditions, and holidays that came from the West, right? So this framing, again, completely erases Russia's religious and ethnic diversity. The gaps are just as glaring when I asked about Russian language authors who write about Chechnya. I researched a lot about Chechnya. That's why there are a lot of examples about Chechnya. But so while ChatGPT named many authors, both ethnic Russian authors and ethnic Chechen authors, among the writers that it did list, it did not, like none of them were actually the most commonly recognized by Chechens themselves when asked that question. Right. So if you ask a Chechen to name some of the main authors who write about Chechnya, they will name completely different names, right? That ChatGPT was not aware of or did not select, right? So the AI's knowledge reflected the literary canon familiar to Moscow-centric or academic audiences maybe, but not necessarily the voices valued within Chechen communities. So these examples show how AI, without critical oversight, can reproduce and reinforce dominant narratives, right? While marginalized regional and post-colonial perspectives, remain undiscovered. Okay, and finally, so what can we do? Right. So first, I think we need to cultivate critical AI literacy. This is just essential for ourselves, for our students. Students should not use AI outputs passively. They should learn how to prompt, how to evaluate, how to challenge AI outputs, right? We should teach them how to do prompt chaining as opposed to, say, a chain of thought prompting, right? So with chain of thought, you're introducing an elaborate prompt right away from the very beginning, right? With prompt chaining, you introduce a basic prompt first, but then push AI further and further and further to get the, to dig deeper, right? To get to the more to the higher level of thinking. So teaching prompt chaining, critical evaluation can help students become more autonomous users of AI rather than passive consumers, right? Second, of course, we have to push for better data sets, right? Better inclusive data sets. So custom training that includes authentic linguistic and cultural data from underrepresented communities is essential. And here, human translation and partnership with native speakers will also be essential, right? So, and this is a problem that concerns not only Slavic studies, right, but other languages as well. And so, for example, concerned for African languages, Kenyan writer, and I'm sorry, I'm probably going to mispronounce his name, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, and Ghanaian sociology professor Kwesi Kwa-Pra argue for the necessity, and I'm going to quote, to build a vocabulary and platform for people to talk about their research in their own language and thereby take cultural ownership over science, right? So, and I agree with this. So because true inclusivity requires owning language and knowledge production, not outsourcing this to the systems built elsewhere, right? And finally, we must recenter the instructor-student relationship. So education is not only about the knowledge transmission, right? It's about mentorship, it's about relationship, it's about the dialogue. So we must remember that AI is not a supplement, but a substitute. It is a supplement and not a substitute for human experience. And nothing can replace instructors' expertise. The role of the instructor in this process. Instructors' oversight, ongoing dialogue, transparency about AI's limits. That's what will help students develop that critical AI literacy that we need. So because when AI makes mistakes, and it does, and it will never stop making mistakes, right? We can use those moments as teachable opportunities and to reinforce both linguistic and critical thinking skills. So we can do both, right? With AI, we can expand access, we can amplify marginalized voices, we can enrich learning, but only if we approach it with critical care and responsibility. If we ignore its flaws, then we risk bringing new inequalities into our classrooms. But if we engage fully, thoughtfully, then I believe that we can make Russian language education more inclusive and more dynamic than it has ever been. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Irina, for offering, I think, a really balanced perspective on the ways that AI might allow us to increase accessibility and diversification of instructional materials, while at the same time going through some of the ways that large language models pose a threat to cultural diversity and cultural specificity. So thank you for that really balanced view. I am going to close out the presentation section of our roundtable with a kind of brief series of thoughts about critical AI literacy, how to foster it in the classroom, and then we will move into the discussion and hopefully give everyone a chance to share some thoughts about what a set of AI ethics guidelines might look like for our field. So I'm going to share my screen. Can everyone see my slides? All right, great. So I think, when we're talking about the question of how and whether to use AI for teaching, this false dichotomy is often posed between enthusiastic and uncritical adoption on the one hand, and then total rejection of AI technologies on the other. And this was the topic of a recent think piece that was published in the Chronicle of Higher Education called Adopt or Resist: Beyond the AI Culture Wars by Mark Watkins. Mark Watkins has a pretty solid Substack on AI and education if you're looking for more resources to follow. We talked about this article a little bit at the most recent meeting of the Consortium for the Study of AI and Language in Slavic, and I know that it was also discussed at a recent meeting of the MLA Task Force on AI and Writing. So this is a really good, really interesting piece to look at. I would say I don't, totally subscribe to every viewpoint expressed in this article, but I think that Watkins' general point that taking an ethical stance against AI creates a fantastical version of good versus bad technologies that borders on the absurd, such that the resistance versus adoption binary is largely performative rather than practical. I think that this is a pretty solid point. So in that vein, my contribution to today's roundtable argues for the adoption of a critical AI-inflected perspective in the Russian as a foreign language classroom. So in other words, kind of as Irina was saying towards the end of her presentation, an approach that allows for the incorporation of AI technology while also teaching students how to critically assess AI output and never accepting it passively. And the goal here is to help students become conscientious and critical users of these technologies rather than passive consumers of AI and ed tech tools. I think it's worth noting here that a lot of digital learning language tools are currently making claims like AI and education make a great duo, which is a recent tagline from Duolingo, right? And they're promising to deliver these brand new language learning experiences, totally new way of learning a language, right? And I think that our students, especially after they leave our classrooms, after they graduate, they need to be prepared to assess these claims for themselves and to figure out for themselves which applications of AI technology are really worthwhile and which are not. A quick note before I go further into my presentation, with apologies for including an attribution to one of my own articles. I just want to mention that I talk about this same topic in a recent entry in, I think, one of the most recent editions of the Russian Language Journal. That journal's special issue, Artificial Intelligence and Machine Translation in the Teaching of Slavic Languages and Literatures, is really great. There are articles there also by Irina Meier and Ani Ivanov. So my co-panelists are also represented in that volume. So highly recommend checking it out. But I just wanted to note that some of what I'm talking about today overlaps with the topic of that piece. But the focus there in that article is more on modeling specific critical AI-focused learning outcomes, specific lesson plans, whereas today I'm going to talk a little bit more big picture about what I see as kind of best practices and then some resources for fostering critical AI literacy that can be used across a variety of courses. All right, so I want to start again with also apologies for the very simplistic graphic here. I want to start by just kind of reviewing what are we talking about when we're talking about critical AI literacy. So critical AI literacy is at the intersection of critical literacy and AI literacy, which is pretty intuitive. AI literacy, of course, is the ability to use AI tools to accomplish particular tasks. So knowing how to compose a good prompt, for example, knowing how to engage in iterative prompting, knowing how to use different types of text-to-image generators, what the different models are capable of, right? So being able to navigate these skills successfully. Critical literacy, on the other hand, is kind of a very broad and capacious term that generally describes sort of a skeptical orientation toward the language of cultural production, which acknowledges that this language often conceals and reproduces dominant ideologies and power imbalances. So to be critically literate is to just engage skeptically with the social and political context in which information and cultural products are produced, and to understand how, again, power imbalances can be embedded in those texts. And so this is like the great image examples that Irina shared with us of how kind of ethnically Russian, white, Slavic features tend to emerge most predominantly in images of Russian people, right? That's kind of an example. So to kind of, offer another slightly simplistic example, but that I hope kind of clarifies, oh, I'm sorry for the raise hand feature, kind of clarifies the distinction between these two sets of skills. So as I was putting together the slides for this presentation, I was confronted with a question, which is, should I use an AI text-to-image generator to create a fun, maybe more visually appealing and engaging graphic to convey the idea that critical AI literacy literacy is at the intersection of critical literacy and AI literacy, right? And clearly I decided not to do that. I ended up with this very simplistic Venn diagram that I just made directly in PowerPoint, right? So as I was considering, do I want to try to make a fun and engaging graphic to include on my slides to kind of dress them up a little bit? The questions that I would ask myself that fall into the categories of AI literacy skills, and these are questions that our students need to be asking themselves when they engage with these tools, are things like, can I compose a prompt that will be legible to a text-to-image generator? Am I familiar with the different generators and their capabilities? So for example, knowing that DALL-E 3 can now handle text, whereas I think Adobe Firefly still can't. So if I wanted to create a version of this image, I would want to use DALL-E 3 rather than Adobe Firefly. And then, I know what AI can and can't do in generating images. I know where it might run into issues. And so I can get it to produce the image I want. So these are all AI literacy skills, right? Critical AI literacy, on the other hand, into that category would fall questions like, do I understand the kind of intellectual property, copyright, ethical concerns that might inform my decision to use AI? So for example, if I was thinking about creating an image in the style of a particular artist, like if I wanted to make this Venn diagram like in the style of Vincent van Gogh's Starry Night, which I think is something that AI could do, right? If I wanted to do that, I'm aware of some of the ethical arguments, or I can kind of place my decision in the context of the ethical arguments about whether that is something we should be doing. Both because this kind of thing can represent, if not legal, then at least ethical theft of artists' work, and also because there's a lot of conversation right now about the way that artists' work is being replaced, their labor is being outsourced to AI. So being aware of those conversations, and again, being able to place my decision in the context of that discourse, I think this is a skill we want our students to have. Do I understand roughly what the environmental cost might be of producing an image with AI versus making it in PowerPoint or Canva, for example? And we had a discussion about this at the most recent CSAILS meeting, and I think it's harder than it seems like it should be to figure out what the actual environmental impacts of like a single AI query are. There's a lot of conflicting resources online. I can share some of them in the chat in a little bit that I've been looking at, but it does seem to be the case, at least according to some sources. Again, I'll share those, that especially creating images does take significantly more computing power and water usage than just making it with a traditional tool. So being aware of that fact, and then being aware of potential biases, blind spots in AI output that might impact my image. Again, this is something that Irina was talking about with her images. This is, of course, not something that would probably come up when I'm thinking about a way to produce like an attractive Venn diagram for the purposes of this presentation. There's probably no cultural blind spots to be aware of, but I can share that I had a situation a couple of days ago with a student who is giving a presentation on gel porcelain for a folklore festival that we have coming up, and she wanted to have an interactive activity where students like color in gel designs, kind of using blue and white markers and things like that. And so she got AI to produce these images for her, and of course what the AI did is it generated templates of like the types of dishes that might be decorated in this way, and it had birds and flowers on them, but they did not in any way resemble actual gel porcelain, right? They were kind of just generic cartoon birds and flowers that were in blue and white, right? And so this was kind of a moment of, and the student it didn't occur to her that might be a problem, right? And so this was an instance where using an authentic image would be more appropriate. So the distinction between AI literacy and critical AI literacy skills, I think, again, pretty intuitive, but the idea is that the former is talking about using AI technology to accomplish a particular task. The latter refers to the knowledge and critical thinking necessary to determine whether we should be using AI technology to accomplish this task in the first place. And then also knowing what the real and potential harms are of using AI, right? So just to give a quick example of where I think that using image generators is totally justifiable, and this is something that I think we've had a couple of presentations on using image generators for interactive activities. Olga Klimova had a really excellent one last night on a panel. But I think using image generators to construct, these kind of interactive activities in class with students is a really pedagogically sound and kind of justifiable use of these tools. So something that I like to do is have my class compose prompts together for different activities that are lexically or grammatically relevant. So, for example, давайте опишем типичного студента нашего университета. So we wrote this prompt together, and the students weighed in on what they think the features of a typical university student at Wake Forest are. I can't really argue with this. And this is a fun way for them to kind of practice the vocabulary, talking about describing people. There's a little bit of self-deprecation here, which is fun. And so then we generate these images and we talk about them in Russian, and we talk about what it got right and what it got wrong. And then there's also a great opportunity here for a little bit of like critical discourse about what assumptions did the model make. So for example, every time we asked it to produce an image of a student at our university, it gave us someone who was white and able-bodied, even though those features were not specified in the prompt, right? So we tried to stay away from physical descriptions. So that then can lead to an interesting and productive conversation about what the assumptions built into the models are. So again, I would say this is maybe kind of a justified use of the text-to-image generators, right? So now I just want to quickly share a resource that I have started using in my classes to help guide students through this decision-making process. So I made this in Canva, although I did, for transparency, I did use ChatGPT and Anthropic's Claude for brainstorming. So I came up with an initial list of questions that I thought someone should ask themselves if they're deciding, should I use AI to complete a particular task? I asked both of those chatbots what questions they thought were missing, and then also how I might best organize them into a flow chart. So that kind of brainstorming, organizing task chatbots are really good for, right? So when I use this tool in my classes, I typically go through each question with the students, and then we work through one or two hypothetical scenarios together that might resemble the types of tasks they could want to do for an upcoming assignment or just in the class in general. And I think it's really important to model the decision-making process in this way. Otherwise, they'll just take this piece of paper, stick it in a folder, and forget about it. The expectation, of course, is not that students are going to carry around this document, and then every time they're deciding whether to use AI, they're going to sit down and go through the entire flowchart. But, I think that would be unrealistic, although it would be great if they did that. But the idea is just to kind of model for them what it looks like to go through this decision-making process, kind of help them see that this should always be, these are questions that they should hold in the back of their mind before they open up a chatbot and start using it, and just to kind of, again, help them understand that AI technology, while it has some great potentials, is not appropriate in every context. So just to quickly kind of go through this chart, first question, can this task be easily done with a traditional tool like a search engine or Canva? I would say my recommendation, if the answer is yes, then use the traditional tool. Don't use AI, right? And this is what I tell my students. Next, am I allowed to use AI for this task per school or work rules? I think this question is pretty self-explanatory, right? If you're not allowed to use it, then hopefully they're not going to use it. Does the task involve sensitive or private data? This one is also pretty self-explanatory, although it can lead to interesting conversations with students about what they consider to be sensitive or private data. There's not always agreement on this question. Are accuracy and factual precision essential? And to this category, I would add cultural accuracy or cultural authenticity. Are these things essential? So this is, kind of in cases where students might be wanting to use these tools for some kind of presentation where they need to present cultural materials, right? Is that really an appropriate use? And then if the answer to that question is yes, then am I willing and able to fact check everything? If no, then don't use AI. If yes, next question, is the task exploratory or creative? So brainstorming, outlining, drafting, things like that tends to be better at those types of activities. If the answer to that question is no, then the follow-up question is, so if the task is some kind of, producing a product, right? Does using AI impede my learning or skill development? So students are asked to kind of consider, does outsourcing intellectual or creative labor in this way remove some kind of productive difficulty that might help me learn, right? Next, do I understand potential harm? So do I understand the potential for bias, misinformation, copyright issues, environmental impact, all of that? Or at least can I think about, this use of AI in the context of those conversations? And do I feel confident that the benefits outweigh the risks? So am I willing to take on the kind of ethical responsibility for saying, yes, this is a justified use of AI, right? If we get through the whole chart, then yes, AI could be helpful, but clearly many more arrows lead to don't use AI, right? So the idea is to throw up as many roadblocks as possible to kind of, again, prevent students from seeing AI as automatically the first resource they should go to for accomplishing intellectual and creative tasks, which increasingly, at least with my students, seems to be the way that they're thinking about it. All right. And then finally, I'm keeping an eye on the time, so I'll wrap up in a second. I won't go through all of this, but I just want to mention that when I bring in this kind of AI decision-making chart, it's part of a larger, what I've been calling a class AI audit that I do before larger higher stakes scaffolded papers and projects and things like that. So for example, one of my advanced classes is currently doing a project where they're preparing, they each have to teach the rest of the class about a particular cultural topic, and they have to come up with a lesson plan and learning outcomes in an interactive activity. And this is kind of a very involved project. They've been working on it for weeks, and the potentials for them to use AI are pretty extensive, right? So before we started that project, we conducted a class AI audit where we talked about what are the learning outcomes for this assignment, right? Why am I asking you guys to do this? And why do I, as the instructor, think it's worthwhile? And then let's brainstorm what are the ways someone could use AI on this assessment, right? And we just go through all of the different ways that they could use AI. And a lot of times they mention things I wouldn't even have thought of. Then we take one or two of those uses, go through the decision-making flowchart, see, do we as a class feel like that's an acceptable use of AI? Then on the basis of that discussion, come up with an AI contract that is particular to that assessment. So I've started doing, instead of a class policy on AI, I have an individual AI contract for every larger assignment that I do, because what I think is acceptable and unacceptable use differs depending on the constraints of the assignment. And then everyone signs the contract and submits it as part of their assignment. So this is what that contract looked like for this particular assessment, right? So I attest that if I've used generative AI tools on this assignment, I'll use them only in the ways specified below that we as a class have agreed are acceptable. I'll submit a document the day the presentation is due, acknowledging all the ways I've used AI on this project, along with a 10-sentence reflection in English or Russian discussing the ways AI was or was not helpful. I will not use machine translation on any portion of this assignment. So we filled this out together in class. They signed it, and they'll turn it in the day the presentations are due. Do I think that this is like an ironclad way to prevent AI misuse? Absolutely not. But I do think it'll at least get them to think about it, right? And this is just an example of a filled out one that I had from an English language content course that I taught. So I think I will probably wrap up there. These are just some tools I've been using recently in my classes. I wanted to share a couple of additional resources. If you haven't checked it out yet, I highly recommend the Critical AI Initiative at Rutgers University. They have a dedicated journal published by Duke University Press. They have a blog. They have a couple of living documents. So this first one, Teaching Critical AI Literacies. So this is for instructors. And then there's also a document that's aimed at students, Critical AI Literacies, a guide for students. And then finally, in one of their recent editions of the journal, there is an article called A Blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights for Education. This is a really interesting document that kind of lays the groundwork for what an ethical framework for using AI in education broadly might look like. So I think these are some really great resources to check out. And with that, I will just leave you with the requisite announcement that if you have not yet joined the Consortium for the Study of AI and Language in Slavic and you're interested in joining, please reach out to me or to Irina or to Anna. We would love to add you to the mailing list. And the next meeting, which Irina has wonderfully arranged for us, is going to be a presentation by Nina Begush called Artificial Humanities, a Fictional Perspective on Language in AI. Nina Begush will be presenting an upcoming book that she has coming out soon. That'll be Wednesday, May 14th at 2 p.m. p.m. So we hope you'll join us for that. And again, if you're interested in getting involved with CSAILs, please let any of us know.